Hello guys and welcome back to my channel. Today we are going to do the tier ranking of all the books that I read in 2024. In total I read 71 books this year, so hopefully it doesn't take too long to go through them all. But our categories for the tier ranking, we have top tier is obsessed. This is my personality now. 2, we have I loved it, highly recommend, but not obsessed. And we have I had a good time reading this and I would recommend it. And then we have I did not have a good time, do not recommend, and I hated it. I should have been a DNF. So let's get into it. Um, so I started the year with a novella called Greedy, and I had a good time reading it, but I have not thought about it since then. So we'll put that. I had a good time reading this. Then I read Powerless. I absolutely loved Powerless. I devoured it when I read it. Loved it. Would highly recommend. Love Redesigned. I also absolutely loved that book. I could not get enough of it when I was reading it. When in Rome by Sarah Adams. I love all of her books. I would read her grocery list if she published it. So I highly recommend that book as well. I have a feeling a lot of my books are going to go in the I loved it pile, and not a lot of them are going to go in the I hated it pile, because if I don't like a book, I'm just not going to read it. Life's too short to read something that you're not enjoying. So I just DNF books if I'm not enjoying them by like 100 pages. But then I went into, I can't remember what they're called, but it was the group of novellas for Valentine's Day. I wanted to read those. I read a lot of them while I was at work. I don't remember anything about them except for like one, but I know that I had a good time. So we're going to put them in the I had a good time reading, would recommend pile. Then I read House of Lemon Shadow. Sarah J. Maas in general, I'm obsessed with her world, as is everyone else, but first obsessed book of the year. Absolutely devoured it. This is my personality now. Could not stop thinking about it. Pinky Promise. I had a good time reading that, but I haven't thought about it at all since I finished it. So I had a good time, would recommend it, but I didn't love it. Magnolia Parks. Obsessed. This is my personality now. Obsessed. Kingdom of the Wicked. I read the first book in 2023, and then I finished the series this year. Loved them. I loved Wrath. Highly recommend. And then this next book, Sunken City. I think I saw on TikTok, I think I saw the author post it, and I was like, oh, that sounds interesting. Maybe I'll give it a try. Maybe I'll like it. I didn't just like it. I haven't been able to stop talking about it all year. I loved those books. I recommend them to literally anyone who asks about a fantasy. Loved it. Then I read Expiration Dates. I had a good time reading it, and I would recommend it, but I didn't love that book. I think my expectations were too high when I read it, and I didn't enjoy it as much as I thought I would, but I still really liked it. How to Choose a Guy in 10 Days. Also had a really good time reading it. Haven't thought twice about it. Same thing with Lessons in Corruption. I had a really good time reading that one. And I think it's like an interconnected series, but I haven't thought about it. I haven't gone back to the next one. Nothing. So, but I remember really liking it. And then another one, I started the Natural series in 2023. Loved it, but I didn't finish it until 2024. Highly recommend, especially if you like Criminal Minds. This is just like a younger version of Criminal Minds. I loved it. I couldn't put it down, couldn't stop thinking about it after I read it, looking for books that give me those feelings. So, loved it. And then I read Bride. I had a really good time reading that one, but I didn't absolutely love it. So we'll put it in the would recommend, had a good time reading pile. Same thing with Happily Never After. I didn't absolutely love that book, but it was fun to read. So I had a good time reading. Then I can't remember how I found this book, The Timeless Trials. The premise of it sounds amazing. Sounds like such a unique idea for a book. I hated it. I hated that book. I almost didn't finish it, but I wanted to know what happened at the same time, so I made myself finish it. But I did not like it. But then I read the next two books in the Magnolia Park series. Still obsessed with it. Moving on. Then I read The Wife Upstairs. I hated that book too. I don't know why, and I couldn't tell you like what it was about really, but I know that I did not like it. But then I read another thriller, Home is Where the Bodies Are, and I had a good time reading that one. I liked it a lot. Yeah, really liked that book. I like Geneva. I can't see her last name and I can't remember. But I really liked that book. I think it has mixed reviews, but I had a good time reading it. So, then I read All of Us Villains. I had a really good time reading that book too. But I tried to read the second book and I just didn't like it as much. I feel like she probably should have just written a longer first book instead of writing two. So I'm probably not going to finish that duology, but I still had a good time reading the first one. And then I was like, I want to emotionally damage myself. So I read A Little Life, and it was phenomenal. I loved it. Possibly my top read for the year. I cried like a baby. I was inconsolable at the end of it, but I absolutely loved it. Do I recommend you to read it? No, because I don't want you to come for me. But if you want to read it, I loved it. And because I did that to myself, I read Happiness for Beginners after that, and I absolutely loved it. It was a romance written like a fiction, like it was more fiction than it was romance, and I just loved that. She did a really good job. Then I read Love Unwritten, and I absolutely loved that one as well. Then I got an ARC for Nobody's Perfect. I wasn't sure how I'd feel about that book, but I had a really good time reading it. It was a little different than the other books that I read, but it was good. And then I read Reckless, and I absolutely love Powerless. So I had high expectations for Reckless, and it just didn't meet my expectations. So I didn't absolutely love it, but I still had a really good time reading it, and I can't wait for the next one to come out. So that one is going to go there. And then I read A Novel Love Story, and I think I had higher expectations for this one as well, and it just didn't deliver the way I thought it would. And so I didn't love it, but I had a good time reading it. So in that good time reading pile. Heartless Hunter, or The Crimson Moth, whichever one you want to call it. I loved that book. I can't wait for the next one to come out. Yeah, that's all I have to say. Um, then I read Renegades. This one was like a little different than the other books that I read. I want to say it's technically a sci-fi book, I think. I didn't absolutely love it, but I had a lot of fun reading it with it's about superheroes, so it was just a little different. I had a good time. I'm going to read the rest of the series. I just wasn't in love with the book. Yeah. Then I read Firefly Lane by Kristen Hanna, and I loved that book. Highly recommend to anybody. Um, I haven't read any of her other books, but if they're anything like that one, they're all amazing. I cried at the end. It just really hits home, I think, for women to read that book because it's about girlhood, and I just highly recommend it to anybody. Then I read The Match, and I loved that book as well. Any Sarah Adams book, I eat it up. Wild Love, loved that book too. Happy Place, absolutely loved it. I think I read all these. Yeah, I read all these books at the same time. I was just picking good books, picking good reads. Dishonestly Yours, I think this book has like mixed reviews. Like I've seen people who absolutely hated it, and then I've seen people who really liked it. I absolutely loved it. I had such a good time reading it. I loved the characters, and I cannot wait for the next book to come out this year. Then Wild Eyes came out. I don't know how I got so lucky to read Wild Love and then Wild Eyes like within the same month, but it was great. I loved it. And then I read We Used to Live Here. And that book really messes with your mind, but it was so good. I couldn't stop thinking about it for weeks after I read it. I think it's technically a horror book. You need to read it. Out of the Gate was a novella. I had a good time reading it. I think it's like almost like a prologue or whatever you want to call it to one of Elsie Silver's series, like a backstory. It was good. And then I read my first Frederick Backman book, and I'm so glad that I did because I am in love with his books. They're all fantastic. Loved it. Anxious People. Loved it. A Tempest of Tea. I think I had just been eyeing this book for so long that I was like, I need to I need to get to it this year. So I did. I didn't absolutely love it, but it was still a really good book. But I haven't thought twice about it since I read it. So, good time reading pile. Then I read Phantasma and absolutely devoured it. I loved that book. I think it probably helped that I read it like right before Halloween, and it just has those spooky vibes, so it was like perfect vibes, perfect atmosphere, and just a really good story. It was great. Then I read Ninth House, and I also loved that book. I was a little scared because I had seen, people talk about it and how like it might be too much for some people, but I loved it. Then A Man Called Ove, another Frederick Backman book. I think I cried at the end of that book. It was really good. Highly recommend. And then one of my prime reading choices this year was Ushers by Joe Hill, which is, I think, a short story. I think it's like 40 pages, but I loved it. Like, I read it at work. My jaw dropped at the end of it. My coworkers were like, "Are you okay?" Because the plot twist for that, I did not see coming. It caught me so off guard, but it was so good. Highly recommend. And because of that one, I was like, I want to read another short story. So I read Graveyard Shift. Did not have a good time. I did not like that one. It sounded really good, and it started off really good, but then it was like the plot changed halfway through, and it just, I don't know, it just took off in a different direction and it didn't really make any sense, so I didn't like it. But then I read Hellbent, and I loved that one as well. Loved Ninth House and Hellbent. It was so good. And then Frederick Backman released a short story, also on Prime Reads is where I got it. And how the man can write a short story and it be so impactful and heartwarming, I don't know. But I loved it. Highly recommend. Then I wanted to read another one of Joe Hill's short stories. So I read The Pram. Did not have a good time. I think that one was just too creepy, too weird for me, too gross, and it just wasn't for me. Moving on. I read The Enemy by Sarah Adams. Loved that one as well. I just love her. I love her writing. Then I read The Inheritance Games. I had such a good time with that one. It's so fun. It's young adult. It's got puzzles. It's got riddles. It's got secret passageways, and it's just a good time. You need to read it. Then I read Quicksilver, and Quicksilver, I haven't shut up about it since I started reading it, or since I read it. Highly recommend. Obsessed with that book. I can't stop thinking about it, and I want to reread it already, and I read it like 2 months ago. Then I read My Dark Vanessa, and that is a heavy book, but I feel like it's a book that a lot of people need to read. It was just, I don't know how to put it into words. It was so good. I loved it, but it was heavy. Then I read Merriment and Mayhem. This was another collection of novellas for Christmas, and I did I hate it? No, I did not have a good time. It was cute up until the end, and then it was just like it was spicy at the end, and it was just like the spice kind of came out of nowhere. And I feel like in a novella, unless it's like spicy from beginning to end, and that's like the point of it, it just didn't make sense to me. So I didn't like it. But then I read The Conjurer's Wife, which is another short story. See, I'm on a theme. I read a lot of those this year. And it was really good. I got it on Prime Reading, and I was happily surprised. I think that's how you say it. Anyway, had a good time reading. Would recommend. It was a lot of fun. And then I picked up Lightlark. I had been eyeing these for a little while. Loved the first 2 books. Didn't love the 3rd book. I think I'm just ready for the love triangle to be over, and it's not. So I loved the first 2 books, ate them up. I still had a good time reading the 3rd book. It was still good. It's just a little annoying with the love triangle at this point, so I didn't absolutely love it. So, had a good time reading pile. Then it was almost Christmas, and I wanted to read a Christmas book, and I had had this Christmas book on my shelf for like 2 years in the holidays. Had a really good time reading that book. It was a lot of fun. It was a cool concept. Kind of reminded me of like Groundhog Day. It was a lot of fun. Would recommend. Then I read Most Wonderful Crime of the Year and ate it up. I loved that book. It was so fun. The banter was great. The mystery was great. Everything was just great. It was just an amazing book. And then I ended the year with Beartown by Frederick Backman. Obsessed. Obsessed with that one. It is so, like, Beartown is about a town that is obsessed with hockey. That's like short, sweet, to the point. But it is about so much more than hockey. And I can't wait to finish the series. It was just amazing. I'm obsessed with it. Okay. That's the end of the tier rankings. Okay, that's all I have for today. I hope you guys had as much fun as I did watching me rank these books. I'm so glad that I did it. I've been watching booktubers do it for like over a year now, and it just always looks so much fun, so I'm glad that I finally got to do it. If you guys had a good time, you should like and subscribe, and then I'll see you guys in the next one, hopefully.